I'm here with Nadia Mierau. We've spoken before on science and astrology and the physics of astrology. Nadia's website is thephysicsofastrology.com. She's an NCGR board member, if I recall, PR director with NCGR. She's the president of the Long Island chapter of the NCGR, and she has a wonderful wealth of knowledge on astrology, on science, because she at one time was also a nuclear physicist, right? Yes. Physicist. And she will also be presenting at the NCGR conference in February in Baltimore. So we'll see her there as well. And we're continuing on from our previous talk of astrology and science and physics. So welcome back, Nadia. It's a pleasure to have you again.
And it's my pleasure, Ryan. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, no problem. So last time we discussed all kinds of topics around science and astrology and the physics of astrology. And one thing that came up within our discussion, within the comment section of our previous video, was the role of epigenetics and how astrology relates to epigenetics. So before we get into that specifically, can you give us a little insight into when we use the term epigenetics, what are we talking about there?
Well, yes, this is something that is very, very interesting that not everybody knows about in terms of science of genetics. At some point, for a long time, genetics scientists believed that, say, our disease, or like genetic disease, comes from essentially our genetics and controlled by our genetics, or our development controlled by our genetics. And this all changed sometime in the 80s, where a whole new branch of that science developed. It's called epigenetics. And if you look up in Wikipedia, epigenetics means that essentially genes do not control our behavior or development, but the genes are affected by external environment very much, and they can alter their structure based on that external influence.
Like the choices we make, like the way we live and things like that?
Well, basically, during certain studies, scientists found that, say, for example, a cancer, they say, okay, cancer runs in the family, which means it's genetic. Well, scientists discovered that sometimes if a cancer runs in the family and the family, say, have an adopted child, that child can also conceive cancer just because the child lives with that family.
Right.
It means there are certain patterns of behavior that going on within the family that the child becomes part of, and that creates cancer in that child that is adopted and not genetically related to that family.
Right. So it could be, for example, like if someone says heart disease runs in your family, and then of course someone might say, well, that's because no one runs in your family. No, but anyway.
Yes. That's a good one. And that's another point. That's another point that with that new science, we can take control consciously of our health.
Right.
And even though, say, something runs in our family, we consciously can defy that by altering our behavior. Mm-hmm. Instead of running the program on subconscious level, we can consciously change that and be healthier and avoid that so-called genetic predisposition to certain disease.
So it turns down, like if, say, for example, the family has a tendency towards heart disease and you decide to start running and eating well, that could lower the chances of the gene for heart disease to be turned on.
Exactly. We can consciously alter that program.
Right.
Genes are essentially our program, like a computer program. Right, that runs our life, and we can alter that program, or that program can be altered externally by the external environment or influence. And as far as astrology goes,
exactly, yes.
So
how do you take that into astrology? Because the planets are influencing us, right? So they are part of the environment.
Exactly. So we are part of this whole big universe, and if we talk about moon and gravity, and gravitational pull of the moon and gravitational pull of the rest of the planets. So that is an external influence that we experience. Is we live in as we discussed in the previous video, in the superfluid universe, where we sort of live in the ocean that has waves, and we're floating in those waves, and those waves are created by mutual motion of all the planets and Earth in relation to each other.
Right.
So we sort of being thrown around. Even though we gravitationally attached to Earth, we still thrown around a little bit by moon moving around the Earth, or by Earth moving around the sun. And so we do have those vibrational patterns in our life, and Earth's gravity has harmonics that related to moon cycle.
Right.
And other planets, and scientists found that Earth's gravity and magnetic field has those frequencies. We are very much infused and attached to those frequencies and to Earth's gravity and Earth's magnetic field.
Right.
Birds fly south every season based on Earth's magnetic field.
Exactly.
If you turn the magnetic field off, we die.
Right.
Disoriented, right?
Right.
And
so how does this, so the reason we got on this topic was, someone posted a comment in our previous video, and we were talking about physics, right?
Yes.
And they said, well, no, it's not physics, it's epigenetics. And then the comment I made was, well, it seems to be that when you're a physicist, you say it's physics. When you're a biologist, you say it's epigenetics. When you're a psychologist, you say it's psychology. When you're a priest, you say it's God, right? So,
that's good. And you're absolutely correct.
Yeah.
But essentially, all scientists and all practitioners and all people look at life from their own angles, but that doesn't mean that life is different for everybody.
No.
The same life, we're just looking at it from a different angle.
Well, and the other thought that I had was, so physics and biology and epigenetics, these things are all interrelated, right?
Exactly, yes.
You need the principles of physics in order to change things in the physical world, whether it's biology or genes or so on. So it's related, correct?
Absolutely. So just like chemistry related to biology, right? Chemistry is more basic than biology.
Right.
So, and then physics is more basic than chemistry, and physics is related to chemistry because chemistry is a combination of atoms into molecules, and physics is a combination of elementary particles into atoms.
And forces too, right?
Biology is combination of molecules into DNA structure and cells.
Right.
We just basically looking at building blocks. So physics is a sort of like a basement, right? And then the first floor would be chemistry, and the second floor would be biology, and the third floor would be psychology.
Right, yeah, because you got to have all that.
Would be God.
Right, exactly. That's wonderful. Yeah, so when we're thinking about epigenetics and astrology then, so what we're doing is we're getting the sense that the planets, however you define it, whether it's gravity or light or other forces that I'm not aware of, that they are influencing this physical structure, they're influencing the genetics and the genes and so on, but they're also influencing our psychology, which is why, the planets can show the general trend of the body as the physical makeup, but it also shows how the mind and the psychology kind of interprets those things. So that's why astrology and epigenetics and physics and psychology, that's again why they're all tied together, right?
Exactly. Yes, exactly. Epigenetics, scientists established that genes do run our life,
right,
on all accounts. So we are humans, and say animals and other types of humans, we all have a genetic makeup, right? And once we understand that the epigenetics, which means those genes can be modified by external influence, which in our case is planetary motion,
Right.
gravitational influence, we then can understand how, say, those planets will affect modified genes for everybody over the course of generations.
Right.
How, say, Pluto, and when its motion, can affect the course of the whole generation, how they self-express. Like, say, for example, when Pluto entered Scorpio, right? That's when our children were born. Was many years when Pluto was in Scorpio. We knew back then that those kids are not going to have it easy. This is genetic makeup of the whole generation of children is influenced by that one planet. Mm-hmm. And now, 20 years later, we see the results that this whole generation is heavily affected by drugs. And it's like epidemic all over the world, and that those people, those kids, gravitate to very intense damaging experiences. Mm-hmm. But the child comes from perfectly good genetic makeup.
Right.
See what I'm saying?
Yeah. And, the other part about that, we look at Pluto for much longer cycles. And I know in Western astrology, when it comes to predictive measures, you use things called progressions, correct?
Right.
So the progressions. And in Vedic astrology, we use dashas, these planetary time cycles. And one thing I've often found is that you can look at a person's chart and you can probably see maybe a genetic predisposition to a disease or to an experience. But if they don't maybe go into that progression from the Western standpoint, or if they don't go into the dasha at a particular time, that might not get triggered. Or in the same way that if you're counseling someone and you see that they have that predisposition, then you see when a cycle is going to run or a particular transit is going to occur, maybe you could say you're going to be more prone to this kind of behavior, which could influence your genetics in this way. So it can be helpful to gain that understanding so that you don't just unconsciously play out that. You pay more attention to your behaviors rather than just the physical aspect of it. Do you follow? Does that make sense? What I'm trying
Absolutely. And while you were saying that, I thought also, to put it in another way, if the scientists of genetics or epigenetics were into astrology, mm-hmm. They could gain a lot broader understanding of what the program is all about, because they're saying, okay, genes are a program that runs your life, but then astrology gives you that program.
Mm-hmm. Right.
You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And sometimes I think that, okay, there is a family, for example, with 3-4 children, right? And the same set of parents, the same environment, they live in the same town for the whole time, the same upbringing, the same food for all 4 children. Right. Why are those 4 children all grow out to be so different? Mm-hmm. And having different physical problems too. Mm-hmm. You might have 3 perfectly normal children. One would be very sick with a certain strange disease, right, that does not even run in the family, right? Or one of the kids could be an addict, for example, mm-hmm. right? Or something else.
Right.
But so you can't really explain that by the science of genetics.
Not by itself.
Yes, but once you look into the charts of these kids, it's like that. You can see all of that.
Right. And the family thing is very interesting. For example, my wife is a twin. And, one of my good friends, he has twin girls, and I actually know a lot of twins in my life, and yet they have radically different experiences. Like they may live in different parts of the world, and when it comes to getting together for a family reunion, yes, they might show up wearing the exact same clothes, right? But when it comes to their choices in relationships or even disease tendencies, while there can be some overlap, they can be radically different. And so that speaks to what you're saying. And also, what I found fascinating is looking at the charts of families. Because it's when I look at the charts of families that you see overlapping patterns that are kind of beyond coincidence. you know, whether a certain house is afflicted in the exact same way, or where everyone in the family has a Saturn-Mars conjunction, or everyone, you see what I'm saying? It's
right.
To see that and how it plays out. I've always found that to be extremely fascinating. And
Yes.
yet the difference in their expression is really, in a sense, how they choose to live their life, right?
Right, right.
Yeah.
And very often what I find too is that you could have two family members whose horoscopes are not that similar.
Mm-hmm.
We'll have some, you know, genetic family kind of aspects, but a lot of things are not similar. And then you find one of them may have a friend who has a lot more similarities in horoscope. And then you suddenly find that that friend will have a lot more similarities with this person than his own sister.
Right.
So I find that a lot.
Yeah, definitely, you know, makes me encouraged about the development and study, the study of astrology and what its potential is. And personally, I think we're really on just the very beginning of exploring this. I know that we've got thousands of years of different cultures exploring it, but I think the real possibilities and how it relates to science, that's something that we need to spend more time on, because our discoveries might be pretty profound, you know, as the years go by in that regard. So it's good to have someone like you who knows a bit about science and isn't just an astrologer. And there's nothing wrong with being just an astrologer, so I don't mean that by any means. But to be able to study a science and to then look at it from an astrological point of view, I think that's really, you know, a wonderful thing. So
thank you for that.
Yeah, I have a question that might take us in a little bit different direction. So before I go there, I want to make sure, is there anything else on your mind about this idea of epigenetics to respond to what, you know, the questions were in the previous video, or is there anything else on your mind about it before I want us to move on a little bit?
Nothing I think of. I think we covered it.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, I think epigenetics is another angle.
Right.
To look at astrology from scientific standpoint. And just like you said in those comments,
Mm-hmm.
Yes, physics, we can explain the same thing in terms of physics, we can explain the same thing in terms of chemistry and psychology, but we're still talking about the same thing, and we
Right.
still come to the same conclusion.
Yeah.
The different angles. I just find that the reason why I got into physics is because it's it seemed to me as a very, very basic. It
Right.
down to nuts and bolts of the universe of our life, how we live.
Well, it's the particles and the forces, which is what makes it all happen, you know.
But the best thing to my understanding is not just kind of look at those nuts and bolts, but also snap and look at the cosmology, at the big picture, and connect them together, because they're very much connected to,
Right.
you know, the nucleus and elementary particles and stars and planets and the whole universe.
Well, I think your analogy about, you know, the first floor is physics, the second floor is chemistry, the third floor is biology, and then astrology, and then we get into, you know, theology and whatnot.
Psychology, yes.
Yeah, and psychology too. I think that's really a great. I think that's really a great way to look at it, because it's the same building, just
Exactly.
different foundations that build up. We are going to go ahead and at some point in this talk, we're going to get to the idea of exploring the zodiacs, the tropical zodiac versus the sidereal zodiac. But before we get there, this thought occurred to me the last time we spoke. So you had been talking about like the fluid universe, right? Or superfluid universe.
Fluid universe,
Yeah.
yes.
And you talked about some other things in regards to like multiple universes in a sense. Maybe I just made that up in my head, but I think you talked about something like that.